Now, the Sovereign Wealth Fund is just part of a series of measures that our government is taking, I suppose, in response to the overall approach to improving the utilisation, accountability of revenue from resource projects. So it's not necessarily a fixed feature of global EITI initiative. It's part of our government's response. But I suppose our government, regardless of the EITI, was already talking about a sovereign wealth fund anyway. We, in relation to trying to spread the benefits of what are really non-renewable resources, to create a revenue stream into the future, store some of these funds for a rainy day, but help us to resist the temptation to consume all the funds today. There's future generations that also are entitled to the benefits of these resources. So I guess it's part of, we can say, it's part of our response, which was happening anyway, but it correlates to the EITI in the sense we want to improve the utilisation of and management of the extractive industry sector. So it relates in that sense.
Just in regards to the comments about the Chamber regarding the changes to the MRA Act, do you have an official response on that? Have you taken into consideration their views for this? What can be done to find amendments?
Yes. No, look, we note the concerns by the Chamber and the industry in relation to the amendments to the MRA Act, which basically amended the composition of the MRA board to reduce, I guess, the dominance that was the main point of the industry on the board. It also involved an increasing of the production levy, which accrues to the MRA, and then there was an apportioning of that increase to the Department of Mineral Policy and Geohazards and the MRA. So it was an additional impost on the industry that Parliament and Cabinet decided to implement. So we hear the concerns of the industry in relation to that. Government had its particular reasons behind that. There was quite an exhaustive consultation process that went ahead. And of course, the decision-making process of government involves, it's a collective decision, and that was the result of that due process. And the government decided that it didn't want, it wanted more of a government dominance, I guess, in terms of the regulatory body for the industry, so that it would avoid some of these potential conflict of interest, I guess, when it comes to the regulation of the industry. That's the rationale behind it. The industry, of course, has its concerns, which are duly noted. But it was an exhaustive process, and this was the outcome from the government's position.
The report has also highlighted serious need for change within PPE, especially in regards to record keeping, and how do we as a collective address the concerns to improve on performance?
There's a movement underway, or an exercise underway, to create an authority as well, an energy authority, which is really related. There's one that's related directly to the petroleum department, and there's another one separately for the regulation of the energy industry. But in relation to the petroleum department, the idea is to create a similar body like the MRA, which has better capacity. That's the reason why we have statutory authorities. They have a bit more autonomy and capacity to better manage their respective sectors. So we want to learn from the experience of the MRA in terms of good and bad, to establish an authority for the petroleum industry that has some of this better capability and capacity for record keeping and the like, and also in the negotiation process and the execution process, so that it is more expeditious when we're dealing with potential investors who want to get projects over the line. You need to have that ability to negotiate good projects, but at good terms, but at the same time it's got to be expeditious. It's got to continue in a timely manner, and you need an organisation that's sufficiently capacitated to make sure that happens, so that ultimately benefits can flow, in a ready manner into our budgets and to the people of Papua New Guinea. We don't want all the projects to happen at once. We've had to learn from the experience that we need staggered investments so that the flows are more even. So you don't have things like a big LNG project and then the LNG project drops away and there's a hole in terms of investment. where government needs to learn to stagger the process as much as possible. We have smooth investment flows from the construction phase of the project, and we want to also look at the project agreements so that the revenue flows are also smoother. When you have a collapse in commodity prices go up and down, the government revenue doesn't necessarily have wild swings in it. It will still move, of course, with commodity prices, but less in a less wild manner. So we're not on the roller coaster ride. And of course, the utilization of those revenue streams to invest into agriculture, invest into tourism, bring the forestry and fisheries industry onshore, so that when there's an issue with the commodity prices or you have an earthquake, it's not such a big impact on Papua New Guinea and the budget, because you have other sources of industry and that's a broader, deeper economy that we're talking about. The mining and gas industry produces good revenue, but it doesn't necessarily produce much employment. And we want industries that are a bit more labor intensive, because we have population that need jobs. And that is a fundamental priority of our government, must be helping our people have meaningful, well-paid jobs. And that's why I'm saying, let's bring the industries onshore. Let's not rely too heavily on the extractive industry. Let's have things like the sovereign wealth fund. So when these resources are gone one day, which they will be, we still have harvest. We've invested into the garden, and the garden is still yielding us harvest over the years. Rather than eating it today, resources are gone, trees are chopped down, fish are gone, big population, and we start looking at each other wondering what went wrong, you see? And this is what the STARS strategy was all about. And it's what government policy generally is about, creating that broader based economy. So yes, I need to rely now on the Secretariat and the multi-stakeholder group to come forward and say these are the best proposed recommendations, and getting the recommendations done. I'll rely on that advice, as I said before. If it requires some legislative changes, like we've done with the Income Tax Act, then that's what we'll do. So, but the important things like making sure the Secretariat is funded and the work continues, making sure it's able to engage people like Ernst & Young, experts to come in, making sure the multi-stakeholder group is meeting and the inputs are coming in, the reports are being produced. It's not easy just to get some of those things, maintain that commitment, government's commitment to the process. And that then, of course, as Laurie Stevens said, when the recommendations come out, we have to actually do something about them. We don't just read the book and put it and move on, start preparing the next report. We need to have some benchmarking, and yes, we actually have achieved something. So we'll rely on Lucas and the team to suggest some concrete and specific measures. I don't want just general recommendations. To achieve this recommendation, this is the specific, Minister, can you make these particular amendments to these particular acts? Help government, executive government, to respond. Everybody's busy, and we need the specifics in terms of recommendations, and we're more than ready to respond.
How much more are you looking at funding?
The Secretariat will continue as the current level of funding, and it's subject also to the budget process. It has to come in and justifications, and if they want more staff and whatnot, it's like everybody else. They've got to come in. But at the moment, we're maintaining our current level of commitment.
Treasurer, you spoke about bringing those industries together, and you spoke about the foreign currency issue.
Yeah.
We have well-established businesses that are having a reputation because of that issue. What's the latest on the government's interventions in that regard?
Well, Andrew Barry will be the first one to tell you of some of the dialogue we're having with some of our big players around this issue. But let me tell you, like I explained in my speech, in the background we've got a fairly high-level analysis going on together with our central bank into some of the project agreements and so on, and we're going through on a project-by-project basis to understand what happens with these foreign currency that is generated from these sales. And each project has a different story. But in a general sense, one should and one would expect that we have a deeper foreign exchange market in Papua New Guinea because of the fact we export so many high-value goods. Even if primarily they are primary products, they're not processed products. The point is we have a very large ongoing current account surplus. What that means is the value of what we export well and far and away exceeds the value of what we import. That is generating surplus foreign currency, which of course companies use it to pay their loans and meet their obligations and so on, but I would still expect there to be a deeper foreign exchange market in Papua New Guinea. So we're examining some of those things. We're of course running through I've already mentioned about the revenue itself that we get from some of these projects, but also revenue generally in terms of taxation, that whole taxation initiative that we've been going through, and the IRC has been doing a very good job there. We are having dialogue with people like the IMF, the World Bank. Patricia is here. We have got some measures coming in terms of financing. I've already explained. 100 million budget support US dollars is coming in from the World Bank. We've got ADB 100 million budget support that is coming in. We've got a sovereign bond program that hopefully next month we will travel to follow up on these particular initiatives, including the sovereign bond issue. We also have the credit. That's going to be in the order of 250 million to 500 million US. We've got the Credit Suisse syndicated loan balance of 190 million US that will be coming in very shortly. For some of the immediate assistance in terms of foreign currency, the ongoing interventions by the central bank. But the deeper questions we're asking is what I've already been describing. You know, we've got a forestry industry, we've got a fishing industry, we've got a gold, we got coffee, we got gas, we got oil. These are all denominated in US dollars. So I've been talking to the companies and saying, you know, companies have some sort of a moral obligation to the country where they take these things from. It is not acceptable morally to take those things and every spare cent of foreign currency that you have, you keep offshore. Because our regime allows that to happen, because we are a free and open economy. The problem is we're a very vulnerable economy because we rely heavily on export. When these companies choose, as is their rights in many cases, most cases, to keep the currency offshore, it affects our market. So they need to come to the party a little bit and understand you don't have to bring everything back, but you must bring some of this currency back into Papua New Guinea. This is where the resource came from, and in order for my economy, our economy to function, we need a monetary system. That monetary system includes a foreign currency element. It facilitates the flow of business. You don't have foreign currency, business struggle. Business struggles, the economy struggles. The economy struggles, government revenue struggles, government struggling to deliver on its obligations. So this dialogue is happening, and we're having a very close look at the... But in the meantime, we have these shorter-term measures in terms of the financing that is denominated in US dollars. Will be coming in throughout the year as part of our financing, and it will help the situation, which is improving very slowly. And you'll see other elements to the equation, like the slight and gently depreciating currency, which is also important because in a flexible market, surplus, supply, demand, the currency needs to be flexible somewhat. But we've got to be responsible. We don't want wholesale inflation because the currency is getting too low and so forth. So it's a balancing act, but there's different tools that the government can use to alleviate the situation. And you know, it continues to be a problem as we go forward, but we're taking it very seriously, and we have these measures that we're undertaking to address it.
You said that the PNGEITI is working on the draft legislation.
Lucas has to tell us where that is. I'm not aware of any particular legislation at this stage. That's something, as I said, he will have to explain to me following the launching of this report, what specific measures that the multi-stakeholder group and the Secretariat wants us to undertake. That is yet to be ascertained, but it's part of the agenda.
The validation starts next month. It's about an 8-month process. Are you confident?
The validation process, starts on the 1st of April in relation to these reports, and we'll see how we go, but I'm very confident that it'll be validated, as Laurie says, and we'll be the first country in the Pacific to be so. And we look forward to that process. We're very confident.
So the tax credit.
The tax credit scheme is on temporary hold. You will notice that you'll see in the media that there's going to be a workshop following the planning workshop they're having in Leh, which is developing the MTDP3, which, as per the Planning Act, I just say quickly, the Planning Act that we did requires that the political cycle is now aligned to the planning cycle. So as the new government comes in, the idea is that by June of the following year, following the election, that the MTDP relating to that particular government is published. So they're doing that process. But straight after that workshop will be the tax credit review workshop. The Cabinet has instructed a tax review scheme be suspended until that process is reviewed and some of the concerns are alleviated. We support the tax credit scheme. it's important if it's utilized in the correct manner. That is, it should be utilized primarily to use the capacity of the resource, the project companies in areas where they don't have the usual capacity in terms of infrastructure companies and so on. But you have a large company extracting gold or whatever it is, we utilize the capacity of that company through tax credit. They can expend qualified expenditure to build roads and other things that they apply to do, and then they can apply to get it deducted from their tax bill. So it's an important and good innovation, and it's produced many good results. It just has to be quickly reviewed like any program and make sure that some of the weaknesses are tidied up and ironed out. And it's not just in resource, in terms of mineral and petroleum resource project areas, but in agriculture areas we also want to utilize oil palm roads and cocoa roads and all this. Very important. This is what we're saying. Going forward, those are the industries that we need to develop.
The key lessons learned from this and the process upon which the MRA Act was finally amended, the lesson learned from the industry is the need for us to engage wider publicly on some of these issues. We have a view that some of the key facts regarding the Act and the processes within the legislation may have been misrepresented, and perhaps when it went to Parliament, there's very important process of transparency within the previous MRA Act. For example, there is equal balance on the board of the MRA. And there was a perception that it was dominated by the industry, which actually was not correct. In terms of the concern that's been expressed about involvement and conflict of interest in licensing, under the MRA Act was quite an independent body where the industry was not present at all, very well put together, and that provided a tremendous amount of independence, which is very much government involved. So unfortunately there was a perception that the industry sat on the board and then the industry sat on the licensing determination. That's certainly not the case. The issue of which I express, Minister, with due respect, we have two of our key ministers here, but the revenue, so what happens with the MRA, and the industry was happy to support that, is a user pay principle. And as users of this regulator, a very important regulator, the industry has a levy of 0.25% of its production, which it passes on to the MRA. And that's been providing surpluses for a number of years. Within that legislation, the MRA had the ability to do two things. Rebate back to the industry, or pass that through a proper process into consolidated revenue. And this is what the industry was encouraging to happen with surpluses. So there was a perception that the surpluses were there, but there's processes to deal with those processes. The concern now is that as a private sector and as an industry, the legislation has allowed for automatic transfer of these levies collected to fund, to contribute significantly to funding a government department, which is the Minerals Department. The industry in principle believes that that's clearly a state responsibility. We are happy to pay for an authority there, but we believe very strongly that the responsibility to fund departments lies with the state, and that's a principle that we support and stand by. At the end of the day, as the Minister has said, the prerogative is for the government, and to make these decisions, as the government in the wisdom makes these decisions. So, but from the industry, we will continue to engage with government, particularly in the key areas of principle. I think there was necessity to review the Act. We supported that initiative to review the Act, but there are some principles. I mentioned a concern that if we follow some of that line from the amendments to the MRA into the petroleum, the proposed petroleum legislation, we'll have concerns for those principles that we have. But very important to understand, at the end of the day, prerogative for legislation and regulation stays with the government, and we just want to encourage ongoing dialogue, but dialogue based on fact and ongoing awareness of legislation that we have very good legislation in our country, as was the MRA Act 2005, and it's important that all stakeholders understand fully all those protection mechanisms that existed in that legislation. So I appreciate the question and the opportunity for us to clarify our concerns.